They called him a ghost, a man who ruled the city through blood and silence. But that night, something changed. He broke into a warehouse to kill his enemies, and walked out with a terrified 16-year-old girl instead. The moment he saved her, the entire underworld turned against him. The city by the sea wore its darkness like a second skin. Along the docks, the air was thick with salt, metal, and the restless hum of engines that never stopped. The water below gleamed black under broken lamps, and warehouses crouched along the pier like tired beasts waiting for morning that would never come. Inside one of them, a single fluorescent light buzzed and flickered above a dented door. Beneath it, men worked in silence, stacking crates, counting cash, whispering orders in low, hurried tones. Cigarette smoke curled through the stale air. In one corner, a young girl sat on the floor, her wrists bound tightly with rope that cut into her skin. 16-year-old Elena stared at the cold concrete, her breath shallow. Her tears had long since dried, leaving faint traces of salt on her cheeks. The men talked about her like she wasn't there. Numbers, transactions, departure times. To them, she was a shipment. To herself, she was already fading from the world she had known. They spoke the name Victor Wren, their tone careful, almost reverent. He was the man funding the operation, the one whose reputation could make hardened men lower their eyes. His name drifted through the room like a warning. Then, outside, tires whispered against wet gravel. The men froze. Someone peered through the door crack, just as a soft, suppressed gunshot broke the quiet. The man fell instantly, blood spattering the frame. The door swung open. 3 figures stepped through the mist. The one in front moved with the deliberate calm of someone who never needed to raise his voice to command obedience. His long dark coat brushed his knees. Beneath it, a crisp white shirt caught the failing light. His face was all hard lines and composure, his eyes cold and precise. Adrian Kane, the underworld of Sable Haven, the city the locals called Sia Share, spoke his name with equal parts fear and awe. A man who had built his empire through blood and silence, Adrian was the kind of presence that bent a room before he even spoke. His men spread across the warehouse like shadows coming alive. The next seconds were chaos wrapped in precision. Muffled gunfire, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, the faint echo of shells rolling across the floor. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. Smoke drifted lazily in the air. Adrian walked through the stillness, boots tapping softly on the concrete. His eyes scanned the room until they found the girl. She shrank back against the wall, trembling. The look he gave her wasn't pity. It was something colder, something unreadable, though a flicker of memory stirred behind it. A face rose from his past. His younger sister, Marianne, 12 years old, smiling at him from a sunlit street that no longer existed. She had vanished one night, stolen by the same kind of men who now lay dead around him. No leads, no closure, just a scar that had shaped him into what he was. Adrian knelt. He pulled a knife from his coat. Elena flinched. The blade flashed once. Not toward her, but toward the rope. With a swift motion, it split apart. The fibers fell away, leaving angry red marks on her wrists. He stood, glancing over the carnage with a face carved from restraint. This place reeked of Victor Wren's trade, his fingerprints on every crate and corpse. Adrian's jaw tightened. Victor had trespassed onto his docks, into his system. But the girl, she wasn't supposed to be here. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, a steady percussion against the metal roof. Elena pulled her knees close, shaking uncontrollably. Without a word, Adrian removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm, smelling faintly of smoke and rain. The gesture surprised even him. Distant sirens began to rise, thin and sharp, echoing across the harbor. Time was running out. Adrian signaled to his men. They moved with swift precision toward the exit. He looked down once more at the girl, this fragile stranger now wrapped in his coat. And for the first time in years something human, small, painful, and dangerous, stirred inside him. He extended a hand. She hesitated, then stood and followed. They stepped out into the night. Rain streamed down the rusted ramp, washing the blood into dark rivulets that vanished into the sea. 2 black SUVs waited with engines idling, headlights muted. Elena looked back at the warehouse, the flickering light still pulsing weakly over the bodies she was leaving behind, then turned toward the car. Adrian opened the door. She climbed in, silent. The leather seat was cold, the air thick with the scent of steel and gunpowder. He entered beside her and closed the door, the sound final, as though sealing a chapter neither could reopen. As the convoy rolled away, the docks receded into mist. Elena pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the rain blur the city lights into streaks of red and white. She didn't know who this man was or why he had chosen to save her, only that the world she'd known was gone, replaced by one ruled by fear and quiet power. Adrian sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He wasn't sure why he had done it either. He had told himself it was business, territory, retribution, but deep down he knew the truth. Saving her had torn open a wound he had spent half a lifetime trying to bury. The city outside, its alleys, its towers, its endless reign, still belonged to him. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time in years, Adrian Kane had broken his own rule. He had chosen to save a life. The city was still sleeping when the convoy cut through the rain. The roads glistened like sheets of black glass, the streetlights melting into long reflections on the wet asphalt. Inside the car, the air was heavy with silence. Elena sat motionless in the corner of the back seat, her hands buried inside Adrian's coat, her eyes fixed on the rhythmic blur of passing lights. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't dare. After an hour, the car turned off the main road, passing through iron gates that opened without a sound. Cameras blinked red across high walls, and guards stepped aside in practiced silence. The vehicle rolled up a stone driveway and stopped before a mansion that seemed more like a fortress pretending to be a home. Tall windows, pale stone, every corner too clean to feel alive. Elena followed them inside. The hall smelled faintly of polished wood and smoke. Paintings of oceans and storms lined the walls, none with faces, as if the house itself refused to remember people. She walked on marble floors that reflected her small figure back at her like a ghost. Every few steps, a guard stood quietly, expression blank, watching her without curiosity. A woman appeared from the corridor, dressed in muted colors, her posture straight and calm. Clara, the housekeeper. Her eyes, though sharp, carried a gentleness that no one else here seemed to possess. Adrian spoke to her briefly, voice low, then left without a backward glance. Clara gestured for Elena to follow her upstairs. The bedroom she was led to felt untouched, almost sterile. Cream walls, soft lighting, a window overlooking the distant city skyline. Clara handed her clean clothes and whispered that there was food waiting in the kitchen when she was ready. Elena nodded without speaking. She stood by the window long after the woman left, watching the rain trace lines down the glass until the sky began to pale with dawn. Downstairs, Adrian sat in his study, the only room in the house that looked truly lived in. Cigar smoke drifted lazily above a desk cluttered with papers, phones, and a single crystal glass of untouched whiskey. His lieutenant, Richard Hale, stood by the door, still dressed in the black combat gear from the docks. Richard waited for instructions, but Adrian said nothing. He was staring at the faint streak of blood still drying on his cuff, lost somewhere behind his own expression. Eventually, he spoke not to give orders but to state a fact. Victor Wren's network had been using their routes. He would answer for it. Richard nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He had followed Adrian for over a decade, through wars of power, through betrayals, but tonight had been different. The man who once dismissed weakness like ash had stopped to free a girl. He couldn't explain it, and he wasn't sure he liked what it meant. When he left the room, Adrian finally leaned back, exhaling smoke through his teeth. He didn't know why the sight of that terrified girl had shaken something loose inside him. Maybe because she reminded him of what was taken from him years ago. Marianne, the sister he never found. By morning, the storm outside had broken. The sun rose pale and tired behind a curtain of mist. Elena woke in the unfamiliar bed to a quiet so deep it almost hummed. The clothes Clara had left fit loosely. They smelled of soap and something clean. When she stepped out into the hallway, she half expected guards to stop her. But no one did. The absence of control was its own kind of fear. In the kitchen, Clara poured her tea and urged her to eat. Elena obeyed out of habit, not hunger. Through the window, she could see a courtyard. Stone paths, trimmed hedges, fountains without water. It was beautiful in the way cold things are beautiful. Elsewhere, the city stirred. By mid-morning, news networks were already spinning their reports. Gunfire at the docks, multiple casualties, suspected gang conflict. The police found no survivors. They had, however, found evidence of a trafficking operation tied to Victor Wren's syndicate. Inspector Dominic Frost, a veteran investigator with a quiet disdain for corruption, studied the photographs on his desk. He recognized the pattern immediately. Territorial precision, silent kills, no traces left behind. Adrian Kane's work. But there was something that didn't fit. The rescued girl. The silence around her identity. For a man known to crush anyone in his way, saving someone was an anomaly too loud to ignore. Frost leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. He gave the order to place Adrian under discreet surveillance. The name Sable Haven had begun whispering again, and it rarely whispered without reason. Back at the mansion, Adrian's phone buzzed once. A single message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have touched what's mine. They are." He read it twice, then deleted it. He had been waiting for Victor to react, though not this quickly. But Victor's message confirmed what Adrian already suspected. The girl had value beyond what appeared. The men at the docks hadn't been moving her as a simple commodity. There was something else she carried, something worth killing for. That evening, as dusk wrapped itself around the mansion, Adrian stood by the window in his study, glass in hand. Beyond the walls, thunder rumbled like a warning. He had built his empire on power and precision, on always knowing more than his enemies. Yet tonight, the game felt different. He wasn't chasing territory or money. He was holding something far more dangerous. A reason. In another wing of the house, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat by the same window as before, the city lights flickering in the distance. Her reflection in the glass looked strange to her. Alive, but not safe. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the warehouse, the dead eyes of the men who had owned her, the echo of gunfire. When she finally drifted into shallow sleep, it wasn't peace that found her. It was memory. Shadows of men's laughter, the feel of rope against her skin, and a voice whispering that she would not live to see sunrise. She woke before dawn, sweating, her pulse racing. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Downstairs, Adrian hadn't slept at all. Papers lay scattered across his desk. Reports, routes, photographs. In the corner sat a small, black flash drive he had found in the lining of the coat she wore. He turned it over in his fingers, studying its blank surface. It was light, unremarkable, yet every instinct told him it was the reason Victor wanted her back. He didn't open it. Not yet. Outside, rain began again, soft but insistent. The city of Sable Haven stretched endlessly under its veil, half asleep, half waiting. Inside the house, two strangers sat awake in different rooms, bound together by violence and accident. For Adrian Kane, it was the beginning of a war he hadn't planned. For Elena, it was the start of a silence more dangerous than fear. The following days passed like a heartbeat trapped underwater. Slow, heavy, and uncertain. The mansion at the edge of Sable Haven no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a place holding its breath. Guards moved with sharper eyes. Conversations stopped when footsteps echoed too close. Even the air inside seemed to listen. Elena felt the shift without understanding it. She wandered the long corridors quietly, avoiding the rooms where men gathered. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something unseen to arrive. Sometimes, she saw Adrian through the glass doors of his study, sitting perfectly still while the city outside blurred with rain. He never looked tired, only restrained, like a storm deciding when to break. Then, one morning, a woman appeared at the gates, calm, poised, carrying a leather medical bag. Dr. Sophia Keller, the house physician who had once been more than just that to Adrian. Her composure filled the silence as she examined Elena with professional care. She noticed the bruises, the malnourishment, the hollow tension behind every startled blink. When the exam was done, she looked at Adrian with that kind of honesty only old familiarity allowed. "She can't heal here," she said simply. "Not in a house full of guns and ghosts." Adrian didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the window where sunlight glimmered off wet marble. Sophia continued, her voice steady but edged with warning. If he truly intended to protect the girl, he had to move her somewhere quieter, somewhere the city couldn't reach. He thought of an old farmhouse outside the city, a property he hadn't visited in years, a place untouched by his empire. It wasn't much, but it was safe. That night, long after the mansion had gone still, Adrian made the call. By dawn, Elena was woken and told to gather her few belongings. She didn't ask where she was being taken. Questions had never brought her safety before. Sophia accompanied her, and a single car waited beyond the gates. As it rolled through the misty countryside, the sharpness of the city faded behind them, replaced by the slow rhythm of open fields and distant hills. The farmhouse stood alone at the end of a dirt road, half hidden by ivy and quiet trees. It wasn't beautiful, but it breathed differently than the mansion. Birds nested in the roof beams, the air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers, and the only sound was the soft creak of wind through wooden shutters. For the first time in weeks, Elena stepped out of a car and didn't feel watched. The sky above seemed impossibly wide. Inside, Sophia moved with quiet efficiency, opening windows, unpacking supplies, boiling water for tea. Adrian arrived shortly after with two of his men and brief instructions: rotate shifts, secure the perimeter, no contact with outsiders. He spoke like a man planning a siege rather than refuge. Still, for a while, the days settled into an uneasy calm. Elena began to breathe a little deeper, to walk in the garden, to feel the warmth of sunlight on her hands. At night, she read the few books Sophia had brought, words she barely followed but clung to anyway. Sometimes she caught Sophia watching her with a look that was part pity, part admiration. But peace was never built to last in Adrian Kane's world. In the city, Victor Wren watched his empire tremble. His men had been slaughtered, his operations raided, his cargo lost, and somewhere out there, the girl who had escaped carried something that could burn it all down. When Lucas Ward, Adrian's trusted lieutenant, reached out in secret, Victor didn't need persuasion. He simply smiled. Betrayal always began with familiarity. Lucas had once sworn loyalty to Adrian, but loyalty in the underworld was currency, traded, spent, or stolen. He'd grown restless watching his mentor soften, seeing hesitation where there used to be fury. Saving a girl, moving her to a farmhouse, to Lucas it felt like weakness. And weakness in their world was fatal. He gave Victor what he wanted: location, guard rotation, and the precise time Adrian would be in transit back to the city. The ambush came on a quiet afternoon. The sky was heavy with clouds, the fields outside the farmhouse still slick from morning rain. Elena sat by the window, sketching the trees beyond the fence, a habit Sophia had encouraged to calm her thoughts. The first shot came from somewhere beyond the trees, distant but unmistakable. Birds scattered from the branches. A heartbeat later, the windows shattered. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted outside, returning fire toward unseen shadows. Sophia grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the back hall, her voice trembling but firm. Downstairs. Go. They ran through the narrow corridor, the sound of gunfire chasing them. The old wooden walls shuddered under the impact of bullets. Smoke began to fill the air, the acrid bite of gunpowder mixing with dust. One of Adrian's men burst through the side door, shouting that the perimeter was breached, and then he fell, a red bloom spreading across his chest. Sophia dragged Elena behind an overturned table as the front door exploded inward. Victor's men poured in like a flood, dark clothing, masked faces, the smell of wet leather and metal. Their movements were practiced, merciless. One of them spotted Sophia and raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the world outside erupted in a second storm. Adrian had returned early. His car screeched to a halt on the gravel path, and before it stopped moving, he was already out, gun drawn. His men followed in a fluid burst of motion, a blur of black coats and muzzle flashes. The first wave of Victor's soldiers fell before they could adjust. The farmhouse became a furnace of noise and light, bullets tearing through wood and glass, shouts drowned by the percussion of war. Adrian moved through the chaos like a force of nature, fast, precise, unrelenting. Every shot he fired was an answer to betrayal. When he reached the sitting room, Sophia was crouched beside Elena, shielding her. He shouted for them to stay down and turned his weapon toward the staircase where the remaining attackers had taken cover. The air was thick with smoke and heat. One of his men fell beside him, blood painting the floor. The gunfire died only when the last intruder collapsed near the door, his mask half torn away. And in the stillness that followed, Adrian saw him, a face he knew, Lucas Ward. The shock hit harder than the gunfire. Lucas lay half-turned, one hand pressed to a wound at his side, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if even he hadn't expected his treachery to lead him here. Adrian stepped closer, his weapon still raised but unnecessary now. "You were supposed to follow me?" Lucas rasped, voice cracked. "You were supposed to be—" But Adrian didn't let him finish. He lowered the gun and looked down with something colder than anger. Disappointment sharpened into ice. "I was never supposed to be anything," he said quietly. "And you were never supposed to survive this world." Lucas exhaled once, a sound that wasn't quite laughter, and went still. Outside, the sky had opened again, rain falling in heavy sheets that washed over the smoking wreck of the battlefield. Sophia knelt beside Elena, checking her pulse, whispering reassurances that neither of them fully believed. Adrian stood at the threshold, staring out into the storm. The farmhouse that had